The chains around his wrists were cold, and the metal bit into his skin as Commander Elias Vance stood in the center of the largest courtroom he had ever seen in his life. The Galactic Tribunal of the Concord rose around him like a mountain made of seats and platforms, and hundreds of alien species filled every corner of the massive chamber. Their eyes and sensors and other strange organs all focused on the small human standing alone on the central platform. He was the first of his kind to ever stand here, and everyone in the galaxy seemed to want to watch what would happen next. Elias looked up at the countless faces surrounding him, and he saw creatures of every shape and size imaginable, from beings made of living crystal that sparkled under the lights to massive slug-like creatures that oozed across their seats. From insectoid species with dozens of legs to tall and thin beings that looked like they were made of smoke and shadow, all of them stared at him with expressions he could not read. But he knew what they were thinking because everyone in the galaxy had heard about what he had done. The charges against him were severe, and the holographic display floating above the court listed them in glowing letters that everyone could see: war crimes against the Valkyrie collective, unauthorized use of nuclear weapons, the destruction of the sacred harvester fleet, 12,000 Valkyrie souls burned to nothing in the fire of human weapons. Elias had heard these charges 100 times already, and he knew that the punishment would be death, because the Valkyrie did not forgive and they did not forget, and they had demanded his execution from the moment they learned he had survived. He should have been afraid, and perhaps somewhere deep inside he was, but when he looked up at the towering figures that would decide his fate, his face remained calm and his lips curved upward in a small but unmistakable smile. High Arbiter Seth Ezra sat on the highest platform of all, looking down at him with 6 unblinking eyes that glowed like embers in the dim light of the chamber. She was Valkyrie, one of the ancient predator species that had dominated this part of the galaxy for longer than humanity had existed, and her body was covered in scales as black as the space between stars. She stood nearly 3 meters tall, with claws that could tear through steel and teeth designed for one purpose only, and that purpose was the consumption of living flesh. The Valkyrie were hunters, and they had been hunting long before humans had crawled out of the mud of their little blue planet. Seth Ezra studied the human below her with cold and clinical interest, trying to understand what she was seeing. He was small, barely reaching her chest, even if he stood on the tips of his toes, and his body was soft and fragile, with no natural weapons to speak of. His skin was pale and easily damaged. His teeth were blunt and useless for combat, and his bones would snap like dry twigs under her claws. She knew that humans came from a death world, a planet so hostile that most species would not survive a single day on its surface. But looking at this creature now, she could not understand how his kind had ever survived at all, and yet something about him made her scales itch with an unfamiliar sensation. It was his face. She realized after a moment of study, despite the chains on his wrists and the death sentence hanging over his head, the human was showing his teeth in a way that should have been a threat, but somehow was smiling. And that smile had not left his face since he had entered the chamber. The trial began with the formal reading of the charges, and Elias stood in silence as the prosecutor, a tall and slender being with skin like polished silver, described the events of Nafar 7 in precise and terrible detail. The Harvester fleet had been on a sacred mission, the prosecutor explained, following traditions that stretched back thousands of years, and the human had destroyed them without warning and without mercy. Holographic images appeared in the air above the court, showing the moment of destruction from a dozen different angles. The Valkyrie ships had been beautiful in their own terrible way, massive vessels designed for one purpose, and then the nuclear fire had come and turned them all to ash and memory. 12,000 Valkyrie had died in that moment, the prosecutor said. and the human standing before them was responsible for every single death. The crowd murmured and hissed and made sounds that Elias could not identify. But he did not look away from the images floating above him. He watched the recording of his own attack with steady eyes. And when it was over, he lowered his gaze and found Sithizra staring directly at him. She expected to see guilt or shame or fear in his expression. But instead she saw only that strange and unsettling smile. The first witness was called a Valkyrie captain who had escaped the destruction by pure chance. And he described the horror of watching his fleet burn around him. His voice shook with rage as he pointed at Elias and demanded justice for his fallen brothers and sisters. More witnesses followed, each one adding their voice to the chorus of condemnation. And with every passing hour, the weight of evidence against the human grew heavier and heavier. But Elias Vance did not waver. And he did not beg, and he did not stop smiling when it was finally his turn to speak. He rose from his seat and faced the court with his shoulders straight and his head held high. He spoke in a voice that was calm and clear. And what he said made the chamber fall silent. The colony on Nephra 7 had contained 40,000 civilians. He explained, men and women and children who had come to build a new life on a distant world. The Valkyrie had not come to fight them or to conquer them. They had come to harvest them. The word hung in the air like poison. And even the Valkyrie in the audience shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Everyone knew what harvesting meant. Even if no one wanted to say it out loud, the Valkyrie were predators, and their most sacred tradition was the consumption of sentient prey. Elias had done what any human would do. When faced with monsters coming to eat his people, he had fought back, and he had won. The court erupted into chaos, with voices shouting over each other in a dozen different languages. But through it all, Sithizra kept her eyes fixed on the human below. She watched him stand alone against the fury of the galaxy, and she watched him smile through it all. And for the first time in 400 years of life, she felt something she could not name stirring in the depths of her ancient heart. The recess was called when the shouting became too loud for anyone to hear anything else, and the various species filed out of the chamber in clusters of scales and feathers and chitin. Their voices still raised an argument about what they had just heard. Elias remained where he was, standing on the central platform with his chains clinking softly whenever he moved, and he watched the crowd thin out until only a few guards and officials remained. He was tired, more tired than he had been in years, but he would not let them see it, because showing weakness to predators was never a good idea. That chamber was quiet now, almost peaceful in its emptiness, and Elias allowed himself a moment to close his eyes and breathe. He thought about Nephra 7 and the faces of the people he had saved, and he thought about the faces of the Valkyrie he had killed, and he wondered if there was any version of this story where everyone got to live. Probably not. He decided, because the universe was rarely that kind. The sound of claws clicking against stone made him open his eyes, and what he saw made his heart beat just a little bit faster. High Arbiter Sithizra was descending from her platform, moving down the long staircase with a grace that seemed impossible for a creature of her size. And she was coming directly toward him. The guards stiffened at their posts, clearly unsure if they should intervene. But a single glance from those 6 burning eyes made them stand down. This was the High Arbiter, and she could do whatever she wanted. Elias watched her approach with that same calm expression he had worn throughout the trial. And when she reached the central platform and began to circle him like a predator examining prey, he did not flinch or look away. She was close enough now that he could smell her, a scent like copper and smoke and something ancient, and he could see every detail of her scales and the way the light reflected off them like oil on water. She was beautiful in the way that a storm was beautiful, or a volcano, or any force of nature that could kill you without even noticing. Zithia completed her circle and stopped directly in front of him, her 6 eyes studying every line of his face with an intensity that made him feel like she was reading his soul when she spoke. Her voice was low and rough, like stones grinding together in the depths of a cave. "You bare your teeth at me," she said, and there was something in her tone that might have been curiosity or might have been threat. Even now, even facing death. "You bare your teeth." Ilias met her gaze without hesitation, and his smile grew just a fraction wider. "I do." He admitted. She leaned closer, and he could feel the heat radiating from her body, could see the way her muscles coiled beneath her scales like serpents waiting to strike. "Is it a threat display?" she asked, her voice dropping even lower. "Do you mock this court with your human expressions too? You think we do not understand what showing teeth means among predators?" Elias considered her questions carefully before answering, because he understood that this moment was important in ways he could not fully explain. "No, Arbiter," he said finally, his voice steady and clear. "It is not a threat." "Then why?" she demanded, and there was genuine confusion in her voice now, something he suspected she did not feel very often. "Why do you smile at me when I hold your life in my claws? Why do you smile at this court that will almost certainly order your death? Why do you smile at all?" The chamber was completely silent now, and Elias could feel the weight of her questions pressing down on him like a physical force. He thought about all the ways he could answer, all the explanations he could give, and he realized that this was perhaps the most important thing he would ever say. "Because where I come from," he began, "we smile at those we care about. We smile at our children when they take their first steps and speak their first words. We smile at our friends when we see them after a long time apart. We smile at strangers who show us kindness, even small kindnesses that cost them nothing." Sethizer tilted her head, her eyes narrowing as she tried to process this information. "And your enemies?" she asked. "Do you also smile at those who wish you harm?" Ellis nodded slowly. "Yes." He said, "We smile at our enemies too, but for a different reason. We smile at them to show them that we are not afraid." Her scales rippled with something that might have been surprise, and she took a half step backward, as if his words had physically pushed her. "You stand in chains before the highest court in the galaxy," she said. "You face execution for crimes against one of the oldest and most powerful species in existence. And you expect me to believe that you are not afraid?" Elias looked up at her, at this creature who could tear him apart with her bare claws, and he let out a soft breath that was almost a laugh. "Oh, I am afraid." He admitted. "I would be foolish not to be afraid. But the smile is not about pretending fear does not exist. It is about refusing to let fear be the only thing that exists." Isishra stared at him for a long moment, and for the first time since the trial began, he saw something other than cold calculation in her eyes. "What does that mean?" she asked, and her voice had lost some of its edginess. "Thought about Earth and about all the generations of humans who had come before him, all the ancestors who had faced down predators and disasters and each other, and somehow kept going despite everything. It means that humans learned long ago that fear is useful, but not sufficient." He said, "We evolved on a world that was trying to kill us from the moment we were born, surrounded by creatures bigger and stronger and faster than us. And we survived not because we stopped being afraid, but because we found something stronger than fear." She was leaning closer now, her 6 eyes fixed on his face with an intensity that burned. "And what?" she asked slowly. "Is stronger than fear?" Elias smiled at her, a real smile this time, warm and genuine and completely unafraid connection. He said simply, "Hope, the belief that even in the darkest moments we are not alone, and that tomorrow might be better than today." "When I smile at you, Arbiter, I am not threatening you, and I am not mocking you. I am showing you that even here, even now, even knowing that you might order my death, I see you as a person. I am choosing to extend kinship to you, to offer connection instead of hatred." She pulled back as if he had tried to bite her, and for just a moment he saw something flash across her face that looked almost like fear. "That," he said softly, "is what it means to be human. We do not hate our enemies. We simply refuse to stop hoping." The court reconvened an hour later, and the chamber filled once more with the rustling and clicking and humming of hundreds of alien species taking their seats. But something had changed in the air. A tension that had not been there before, and those with keen senses could feel it like static electricity before a storm-high arbiter Sethesra sat on her platform again. But her posture was different now, less rigid and commanding, and her 6 eyes kept drifting back to the human standing below, as if she could not stop looking at him. The other arbiters noticed, exchanging glances that communicated concern and confusion. But none of them dared to question her when the session resumed. The prosecutor stood and demanded that the human explain his actions in full detail. Not just the what, but the why. Elias Vance stepped forward, his chains rattling with each movement. And when he spoke, his voice carried across the massive chamber with a clarity that made everyone fall silent. "You want to know why I did what I did," he said, looking not at the prosecutor, but at the assembled masses above him. "You want to understand how a single human could destroy a fleet that had conquered worlds. Then let me tell you about my people." He began with Earth, describing it in simple words that painted a picture of beauty and horror combined. His homeworld was classified as a Category 12 death world by the Concord, one of the most hostile environments known to support intelligent life. And he explained what that meant with examples that made the audience shift uncomfortably in their seats. He told them about the bacteria that lived inside human bodies by the trillions, some helpful and some deadly, and about the viruses that had killed millions throughout history only for humans to keep coming back. He told them about the predators that had hunted his ancestors, the great cats and wolves and bears, creatures with claws and fangs that should have wiped humanity from the face of the planet. And then he told them something that made even the Volcari lean forward in their seats. "We did not just survive these predators," he said with that strange smile still on his face. "We befriended them." A murmur ran through the crowd, sounds of disbelief and confusion from species who could not imagine such a thing. Elias continued, his voice growing stronger as he spoke. "The wolves that hunted us in the long winters became our companions." He explained, "We fed them and sheltered them and bred them until they became dogs, creatures that would die for us without hesitation, that loved us with a loyalty that never wavered. The wildcats that could have torn us apart became our household companions, curling up in our laps and purring while we stroked their fur. We took the most dangerous creatures on our world and turned them into family." He paused to let that sink in, watching the reactions ripple through the audience. "This is what humans do," he said. "We do not conquer through strength alone, because we were never the strongest. We were not the fastest or the deadliest or the most powerful. What we are is persistent. We are the species that refuse to give up." He told them about persistence hunting, the ancient technique his ancestors had used long before they had weapons or tools. Humans could not outrun their prey. He explained that they did not need to. They would follow an animal for hours, sometimes days, walking when it ran, never stopping, never resting, until the creature collapsed from exhaustion and heat, because humans could sweat to cool themselves while other animals could not. They could keep going long after their prey had given up. "We hunted not with speed, but with patience," he said. "We won not by being better, but by refusing to stop, and that is still who we are today." He looked up at Sethesra, meeting her 6 eyes without fear. "When your fleet came to Nefar 7, he said, they expected easy prey. They expected colonists who would scatter and hide and wait to be harvested. What they found instead was 40,000 humans who would rather die fighting than let a single child be taken. I did not destroy your fleet because I hated them. I destroyed them because that is what humans do when someone threatens our people. We fight. We always fight, and we never, ever stop." The chamber was utterly silent now, and Elias could feel the weight of 1,000 eyes upon him. He thought about the children of Nefra 7, the ones who had hidden in shelters while the Valkyrie descended from the sky. And he thought about the parents who had stood ready to die protecting them. That was the heart of humanity, he realized. Not the weapons or the technology or the stubborn refusal to surrender. It was love. It was always love. There is something else you should understand about humans, he said, his voice softer now, but still carrying through the silence. We smile not because we are happy or because we are mocking you. We smile because 10,000 generations of ancestors taught us that connection is survival alone. A human is weak together. We are unstoppable. When I smile at you, Arbiter, I am not showing you my teeth as a threat. I am showing you that I am willing to be your ally, your friend, even your family. If only you will let me. He spread his hands as far as the chains would allow. A gesture of openness that seemed absurd coming from a prisoner. The Valkyrie see the galaxy as a place of hunters and prey, of dominance and submission. Humans see it differently. We see it as a place full of potential friends we have not met yet. Potential family members waiting to be found. That is why we smile at strangers. That is why we smile at enemies. That is why I smile at you even now, because somewhere inside me, in the deepest part of what it means to be human, I still hope that you will smile back. Sithishra felt something cold run down her spine. Something that her species had not experienced in millennia of conquest and domination. She was afraid not of the human's weapons or his technology, or even his stubborn refusal to surrender. She was afraid of his hope. She was afraid of his smile, and she was afraid of what it would mean for the galaxy if creatures like him were allowed to spread their strange philosophy of connection and love to every species they encountered. The Valkyrie had ruled through fear for 10,000 years. And in that moment, watching a chained human offer friendship to his executioner, Sithishra understood that fear might not be enough anymore. The trial was supposed to continue for another 3 days. But the prosecutor stood in stunned silence for nearly a full minute after the human finished speaking. And when she finally gathered herself enough to respond, her voice had lost all its sharp confidence. She stumbled through her remaining questions, and Elias answered each one with the same calm patience, never raising his voice and never letting his smile fade. The other witnesses who were supposed to testify against him seemed to lose their enthusiasm one by one, their accusations sounding hollow in the wake of his words. By the time the second day ended, the mood in the chamber had shifted completely. The alien species who had come expecting to watch an execution were now whispering among themselves in hushed and uncertain tones, and many of them kept glancing at the human with expressions that ranged from fear to fascination to something that looked almost like admiration. High Arbiter Sithishra watched it all from her platform, and with every passing hour she felt the ground beneath her crumbling a little more. She had presided over thousands of trials in her long life, had sent countless beings to their deaths without a moment of hesitation, and she had always believed that justice was simply another word for power exercised through proper channels. That this human, this small and fragile creature from a death world on the edge of known space, had done something she would not have thought possible. He had made her doubt. That night, alone in her private chambers, Sithishra paced back and forth across the cold stone floor and tried to make sense of what she was feeling. The Valkyrie did not doubt. They did not hesitate. They were predators, born and bred to hunt and kill and consume, and their dominance over the galaxy was as natural as the movement of stars through the void. And yet she could not stop thinking about the human smile. She called up the recordings of the trial and watched them again and again, focusing on his face as he spoke about wolves and dogs and the strange human custom of befriending creatures that could kill them. She watched the way his eyes softened when he talked about the children of Nephra 7, the ones he had been willing to die to protect. And she saw something there that she did not recognize it. Took her until the early hours of the morning to put a name to it. Love. The human loved those people. Not because they could give him anything, or because they served some purpose in his life, but simply because they existed and they needed him. He had looked at 40,000 strangers and seen familiar Sethishra, turned off the recordings and sat in the darkness of her chamber, feeling older than she had ever felt before in 400 years of life. She had never loved anything. She had desired things and possessed things and consumed things. But love was a concept that existed only in the abstract for her species, a weakness that other beings suffered from, and that the Valkyrie had long ago evolved past her, so she had always believed. But watching the human talk about his people, watching him smile at creatures who wanted him dead, she found herself wondering if the Valkyrie had not evolved past love, but had simply never found it in the first place. The thought was terrifying and liberating, and she did not know what to do with it. The third day of the trial arrived, and the chamber was more crowded than it had ever been, with beings standing in the aisles and crowding the doorways just to catch a glimpse of the human who had made the galaxy question everything it knew. Elias stood on his platform as he had before, calm and patient and smiling, and he watched the chaos around him with eyes that seemed to see more than they should. When Sethishra called for order, her voice echoed through the chamber with a force that silenced even the most persistent whispers. Valkyrie delegation rose to make their final statement, and the ambassador who spoke was one of the oldest and most respected of his kind, a warrior who had conquered worlds and devoured kings. He demanded death for the human. He demanded blood for blood and flesh for flesh, invoking traditions that stretched back to the dawn of Valkyrie civilization. He spoke of honor and vengeance and the sacred right of predators to hunt as they saw fit, and his words were met with roars of approval from the Valkyrie in the audience. When he finished, he turned to stare at Elias with eyes that burned with hatred, and his voice dropped to a hiss that carried perfectly in the sudden silence. "You think your smile makes you special, human," he said. "You think your words about love and connection will save you from justice. But in the end, you are nothing but prey. And prey exists to be consumed." Elias looked at him for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice was gentle in a way that seemed out of place in that chamber of judgment. "You are right," he said. "I am prey. Every human who has ever lived has been prey to something. Whether it was the beast of our world or diseases that lurked in our bodies, or the cold of winters that seemed like they would never end. We are small and soft and easily broken. And there is nothing special about us except for one thing." The ambassador leaned forward, his claws scraping against the railing of his platform. "And what is that one thing?" he demanded. Elias smiled at him, and for just a moment, there was something in that smile that made the ancient warrior flinch. "We are the prey that learned to love our hunters," Elias said. "We took wolves and made them dogs. We took cats and made them companions. We took the fear that should have destroyed us and transformed it into something else, something stronger, something that no amount of claws or teeth could ever defeat." He turned to face the entire court, his voice rising until it filled every corner of the massive chamber. "You can kill me," he said. "You can kill every human in the galaxy, but you will never kill what we represent. Because our ideas do not die when we do somewhere out there. Some other species will learn to smile at their enemies. Some other civilization will discover that connection is stronger than conquest, and when they do, they will carry a piece of humanity with them forever, even if they never knew we existed." The Valkyrie ambassador opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. He looked at the human standing below him, chained and defenseless and completely unafraid, and he realized that he was looking at something he had never encountered in all his centuries of war and conquest. Was looking at a creature who could not be beaten, not because he was strong or not, because he was faster, but because he had already won the only battle that mattered, the battle for hope. The deliberation lasted 6 hours, And during that time, the galaxy held its breath. Every news channel across 1,000 worlds carried the story live, showing footage of the humans standing alone in the empty chamber, while the arbiters argued behind closed doors. Commentators from 100 different species offered their predictions and analysis, but none of them could agree on what would happen next. The Valkyrie were powerful. Everyone knew that, and they had never lost a trial before this court, but something had changed. Something that even the most experienced observers could not quite explain. The human had not begged for mercy or claimed innocence. He had not tried to justify his actions through legal technicalities or political maneuvering. He had simply told them who he was and what his people believed. And somehow that had been more devastating than any weapon. Elias sat on the cold floor of the platform, his back against the central pillar and his eyes closed, listening to the distant murmur of voices that leaked through the chamber walls. He was tired, more tired than he had ever been in his life. But there was a peace inside him that had not been there before. Whatever happened next, he had done what he came to do. He had told the galaxy about humanity, about the strange creatures from a death world who had learned to smile at their enemies and love their hunters if they killed him now. At least the message would survive. The doors opened with a sound like thunder, and Elias rose to his feet as the arbiters filed back into the chamber. He watched their faces as they took their seats, trying to read some hint of the decision in their expressions. But their alien features gave nothing away. Zisra was the last to enter, and she moved more slowly than before, as if carrying a great weight on her shoulders. When she reached her platform, she stood for a long moment without speaking, her 6 eyes moving across the chamber and finally coming to rest on the human below. The galaxy watched through 1 billion screens as she opened her mouth to deliver the verdict. Human, she said, and her voice was different now, softer and more complex than it had been at the start of the trial. You stand accused of crimes against the Valkyrie Collective, of the destruction of the sacred Harvester fleet, and of the deaths of 12,000 souls. The chamber was silent, every being present holding their breath as they waited for the final word. This court, she continued, finds you not guilty. The explosion of sound that followed was deafening, a mix of cheers and roars and screams of outrage that shook the very foundations of the building. The Valkyrie delegation surged to their feet, their voices raised in fury. But Sethizra silenced them with a single raised claw. The humans' actions, she said, were conducted in defense of civilian life against an unlawful harvest. The Valkyrie fleet operated outside Concord's sanction when it descended upon Nephra 7, and the beings they intended to consume were protected citizens under galactic law. The destruction of the fleet was therefore an act of legitimate defense, not a crime. The Valkyrie ambassador screamed something in his native language, a curse so ancient that only a handful of beings in the galaxy could understand it. But Sethizra ignored him completely. Furthermore, she said, her voice rising above the chaos, this court formally requests the opening of diplomatic relations with the species known as humanity. It is the opinion of this arbiter that the Concord has much to learn from them, and that their inclusion in our galactic community would benefit all sentient beings. She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice was quieter, almost gentle. You are free to go. Commander Vance Elias looked up at her, at this ancient predator who had held his life in her claws, and he felt something warm bloom in his chest. Thank you, Arbiter, he said. She nodded once, a gesture he had not seen any Valkyrie make before. And then she did something that made the entire galaxy gasp. Human, she said. One question. He waited, sensing that this moment was important in ways that went far beyond his own survival. Do you truly not hate us? She asked. And there was something vulnerable in her voice that he suspected she had never shown to anyone before. After what the Valkyrie have done to your kind, after everything you have witnessed, do you truly hold no hatred in your heart? Elise considered the question carefully, thinking about all the humans who had died at Valkyrie Claws, about the colonies that had been harvested and the families that had been destroyed. He thought about the rage he had felt when he gave the order to fire, about the satisfaction of watching those ships burning. Then he thought about the children of Nephra 7, playing in the sunlight of a world they had been allowed to keep. And he knew what his answer had to be. Hate is easy, he said, his voice carrying across the silent chamber. It is the simplest thing in the world to hate those who hurt us, to wish them pain and suffering in return for what they have done. But my people learned long ago that hate is a poison that destroys the one who holds it, not the one it is aimed at. He looked directly at Sethizra, at her 6 eyes that no longer seemed cold or alien, but simply tired and searching. Love takes courage, he said. It takes strength to look at an enemy and see a potential friend, to look at a predator and see a possible companion. Humans do not love easily, and we do not love without reason, but when we choose to love, we love with everything we have. He paused, and his smile grew warmer than it had been throughout the entire trial. I do not hate you, Arbiter. I do not hate the Valkyrie. Simply hope that someday, maybe not soon, but someday, we can be something more than enemies. Sethishra stared at him for a long moment, and the galaxy watched as something shifted in her expression, something that her species had not shown in 10,000 years of conquest. And then, slowly, hesitantly, like a creature taking its first steps into a new world, the High Arbiter of the Galactic Concord did something unprecedented. She smiled back. It was not a human smile. Not quite. Her teeth were too sharp, and her face was not built for the expression. But the intent was unmistakable. She was trying. Elias felt his heart swell with something that was not quite joy, but was close enough. And he nodded to her with a respect that was entirely genuine. He turned and walked toward the exit, his chains having been removed at some point during the chaos, and the crowd parted before him like water before a ship at the threshold of the chamber. He paused and looked back one last time. The galaxy was watching, he knew. 1 billion beings on 1,000 worlds, waiting to see what the human would do. He raised one hand in a gesture that humans had used for centuries, a simple wave that meant hello and goodbye and everything in between. And then Commander Elias Vance walked out into the light of an alien sun, leaving behind a courtroom full of beings who would never look at the universe the same way again. The Valkyrie would remember this day for generations, the day when a single human had stood before their judgment and refused to be afraid. Other species would tell stories about the creature who had smiled at death and offered friendship to his executioner. And somewhere in the vast darkness of space, humanity continued to do what it had always done. They reached out to the unknown with open hands and hopeful hearts, looking for enemies to turn into friends and strangers to turn into family, because that was who they were. That was who they would always be. A species that smiled at the darkness and waited for the darkness to smile back.